Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to That Time. And today we are talking about that time when John Paul Jones. Prepare to meet your new hero. That's all I had to say. So, we're going back to the American Revolution, and, well, the early days of the Revolution. So, we're talking the kind of mid-Revolution, actually. 1778, 1779, that time frame. So not as late as this image depicts, but we're talking about a person who is now regarded as the founder of the U.S. Navy. And of course, at the time, the British Navy was considered the best navy on the planet, and no one could ever defeat it. And people were curious to see how well the revolution and rebellion would work if the American colonists couldn't secure naval superiority, or at least be competitive on the seas. Because, again, the British Navy was the best on the planet. It had the most ships. It had the biggest ships. The British sailors were arguably the best sailors on the planet. And they captured and forced into service, impressing not only American colonists, but Canadians. Pretty much any merchant ship they captured, they would actually just take people and say, well, you're a British sailor now. Well, and of course, anyone who thought to compete against them was laughed out of the room. But you try laughing this guy out of the room. This is John Paul Jones, and like I said, prepare to meet your new hero. He essentially used pirate tactics to defeat the British Navy wherever he went. So he actually did start as a privateer in some regards, slash a British sailor, but he kind of soured when, after punishing one of his crew, they kind of died, and Britain, the court that he was going to be tried in, was very influenced by that sailor's family, so he decided, yeah, no, I'm going to the colonies now. And so he went to Fredericksburg, Virginia, though North Carolina kind of claims him as well. And about this time, he actually added the name Jones to his name. His original name was John Paul, but he added Jones partially to avoid British law enforcement, but also partially because it makes him sound like even more of a badass. And like I said, he used pirate tactics. So as the revolution was getting underway, he sailed up to Boston, and he was put in command of a ship, even though the person who was in charge of American, what was becoming the American Navy, didn't really like him and tried to hinder any strategy or plans that he made. But he was given an order: go to France and aid the American cause as much as possible. Okay, fine. He sails to France, and instead of getting the ship that he was promised, which was being touched up and converted from a merchant ship to a warship in Holland, he winds up getting control of a ship called the Ranger. And he raids a few towns in Ireland and manages to cap a ship, the HMS Drake. And this isn't just one battle, this is part of many battles. But yeah, so he captures the Drake, and he sails it back down to France, where he's actually given command of a ship given to the Americans by the French, which he names the Bonhomme Richard. Or as he often put it in his own documents, the Bonhomme Richard. Whatever. So he continues sailing around Britain and raiding towns, causing a terrible fright. Yeah, he pretty much, like I said, he was a pirate, pretty much. And he's raiding towns along the coast of Britain, and then he runs into a small British fleet led by a ship called the Serapis. And this is his most famous moment. So during the battle, the Serapis greatly outguns his own ship, the Bonhomme Richard. And there were a few other American ships as well. It wasn't just the Bonhomme Richard. And like I said, there were other British ships as well, not just the Serapis, but these were the two flagships, which are the important ones. And in the fighting, the Serapis and Bonhomme Richard kind of get separated from the main group, meaning it's not easy for the captain to transfer flags in terms of, transfer ship, command ship, or flagship, which is what I mean when I say transfer flags, which does occasionally happen or did occasionally happen in naval warfare around this time frame. Well, at one point, the majority of the sails on the Bonhomme Richard get shot off. I think all three masts, by the end of this, all three masts of the Bonhomme Richard actually get destroyed. And the British commander tells him, or asks him, so have you struck? Meaning, have you struck your colors? Have you surrendered? Because he didn't want to kill anybody if not necessary. And John Paul Jones responds, at least as far as we can tell, as far as documents say, as far as news reports say, he responds, I have not yet begun to fight. Yeah, his ship is dead in the water, and he's still fighting on. Like I said, meet your new hero. So, and it gets even crazier. So at this point, what rigging is left up, he is having his Marines shoot at British officers on the deck, and the Brits realize, well, we're going to have to charge this thing. We're going to have to board this ship to get him to surrender. So they try, and it doesn't work. They are unable to board the ship. And a little bit later, people realize that the Bonhomme Richard is actually sinking. And so the captain of the British ship, the Serapis, once again asks John Paul Jones, have you struck? And John Paul Jones says, or at least in his own official report, he replied something along the lines of, I am determined to make you strike, which apparently his crew heard something different. And of course, news reports also corroborate the crew. And they said that John Paul Jones replied, I may sink, but I'll be damned if I strike. So yeah, he was fighting to the death, and he didn't really care. And a little bit later, another American ship, I believe the Alliance, if I remember correctly. I have actually researched this. My memory is I'm trying to remember which ship was where. And various ships had actually come through to also shoot at the Serapis, which had also done more damage to the Bonhomme Richard. And anyway, John Paul Jones comes in, and he does eventually wind up taking the Serapis because their captain gets shot and dies. And the lieutenant realizes that there's no point in continuing this battle because if he does, the crew of the Bonhomme Richard is not going to surrender, and the ships are basically intertwined. So if the Bonhomme Richard sinks, the Serapis sinks. And he doesn't want that. So he actually surrenders, even though he probably still has the upper hand. He just realizes not Bonhomme, but yeah, that John Paul Jones is crazier than he is. And I think part of that is because if John Paul Jones had lost, his entire crew would have been killed for being pirates. So John Paul Jones takes command of the Serapis because they have to actually scuttle, which is a fancy word for sink. They actually have to scuttle the Bonhomme Richard because it's just that far beyond repair. And they sail into Dutch waters and land in a Dutch port for repairs. However, they don't have an official insignia. They don't have an official ensign. And this is a big no-no, meaning that the Dutch, if they wanted, could have, arrested and hung him for piracy. However, at the time, the Dutch were pro-American, you know, just the way it is. So instead of doing that, they create, based off of a description from Benjamin Franklin, an official ensign for John Paul Jones. And actually, it looks pretty nice. I think at some point, a state should make this their official flag. I really do. Because that is a well-designed flag. It's not perfect, but it is well-designed. And it was entered into Dutch records as an official American naval symbol. And yeah, I mean, seriously, that is a well-designed flag. Anyway, John Paul Jones goes on to do a bunch of other things. He serves in the Russian Navy, and then he returns to France, where he does eventually die in the late 1700s. And he winds up being buried in Annapolis, in Maryland, at the U.S. Naval Academy. So, yes, the American Navy was essentially founded by a pirate. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.